Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your day. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to be there in person. A big thanks to Vonnie for pulling together such a brilliant panel of women. It's an honour to be included on that, and I'm sure you're going to have a great session. My name's Karen Ingala Smith. I'm Chief Exec of a charity called NIA. We're based in North East London, and we support women and girls who've been subject to men's violence. That's sexual and domestic violence and abuse, including prostitution. I also run a project called Counting Dead Women, and I'm co-founder and a director of the Femicide Census. I started Counting Dead Women in January 2012 when a young woman who had been referred to NIA, the charity that I work for, was stabbed to death by a boyfriend. In fact, it turned out that in the first 3 days of the year, 8 women in the UK were killed by men. 3 days and 8 dead women. 3 were shot, 1 was stabbed. 1 was stabbed and beaten so hard with her own walking stick that the wood splintered. 1 was beaten, 1 was strangled, and 1 was smothered. Since then, I've been counting dead women, keeping a record of the women in the UK who've been killed by men. I've personally recorded the names of over 1,400 women who were victims of men's fatal violence. I should add that includes some cases where the criminal justice process hasn't yet concluded, or where but a man's the principal suspect, but also where it's been prevented, for example, if he killed himself as well. The Femicide Census, which I co-founded and run with Clary O'Callaghan, was launched in 2015. It's the UK's most comprehensive source of information analysis of men's fatal violence. For those of you who haven't come across the word femicide, it's the killing of women, girls, female infants and fetuses, predominantly but not always committed by men. Femicide maintains men's individual and or collective dominant status, or reflects the lower status of females. Femicide isn't just homicide of women by men. It's about how and why women are killed and how this is different to the circumstances in which men are killed. I don't think there's a person here who won't know the name of Sarah Everard, and almost all of you will also have heard of Sabina Nessa. The deaths of both these women made national headlines. You'll also probably know that it's just gone a year since Sarah was abducted, raped and murdered, and perhaps also that the man who murdered Sabina admitted his guilt last week. But since Sarah was killed, at least 125 other women were killed in circumstances where a man was either held as suspect, he's awaiting trial, or killed himself when he killed his victim. So do you know the name of the 84-year-old woman who was allegedly strangled by a burglar? What about the 25-year-old woman who was found dead beneath floors in bin bags with the body of her 2-year-old daughter? It's suspected that that 2-year-old daughter had been sexually abused, as well as another child who survived. Or the 82-year-old suspected to have been stabbed by her 84-year-old husband. Or do you know the name of the 29-year-old found dead in the street with stab wounds to her neck, chest and arm, who was killed by her husband? The names of these women aren't household names. Men's fatal violence against women cuts across all sections of society, across all ages, classes and ethnicities. But some women are afforded more empathy than others. Some are more likely to be disbelieved, to be blamed, or to be sent away without the help that they need. This appalling hierarchy of victims continues into death. It's almost always the young, conventionally attractive, middle-class, professional white woman killed by a stranger, in other words, the perfect victim, that makes the front pages. It's not usually the 50-year-old from a council estate in Sheffield, killed by the father of her children after a 30-year marriage, where her life and dignity have been chipped away little by little every day. It's not usually an immigrant woman. It's not usually a 45-year-old homeless woman with a drug problem, who was sexually abused from childhood to her until her death. We need to end the hierarchy of dead women. And of course, that hierarchy is there in life too. Poor women are more likely to be blamed. Black and disabled women are disproportionately victimised, yet more likely to receive a substandard response from the state. Because of the femicide census, we know that in the 10 years between 2009 and 2018, in the UK, 92% of women who are killed by men are killed by somebody that they know. We know that 1 in 12 women who were killed by men, or 8%, were killed by their own sons. That's the same number, the same proportion of women in the UK who were killed by a stranger. 62% of the women who are killed by 62% of women killed by men are killed by a current or former partner. More than 40% of these had already left him or were taking steps to leave him. And more than a third of those were killed in the first month, with 3/4 killed in the first year. Because of the femicide census, we know that Sarah Everard was the 16th UK woman to be killed by a serving or former police officer since 2009. Do I believe that it's possible to end men's violence against women, to end femicide? I have to say that I don't really know. Do I believe that it's likely that we will? Then I know that the answer to that is no. There just isn't the political will. Patriarchal societies in which men hold power, primary power, and predominate in patriarchal societies in which men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, authority, social privilege and control of resources ensure that the power stays with the powerful and the advantaged. It's the same with economic class, socio-economic class, it's the same with race. Sure, there'll continue to be steps to address men's violence against women and girls, and mostly these will have originated from feminists, but it'll always be a watered down version that makes it through the legislative process. Men's violence against women and girls is both a cause and consequence of sex inequality. Whilst perpetrators must be held responsible for their actions and behaviours, men's violence against women can't simply be reduced to individual acts by individual men. It's a key instrument of men's domination of women, supported and normalised by patriarchal institutions, attitudes and social norms and values. Mostly when governments talk about tackling men's violence against women and girls, they talk about reforms to policing and the criminal justice system. Don't get me wrong, reform there is necessary, but perfect policing and a perfect criminal justice system will not stop us creating men who harm women. Feminists have been telling us what we need to do for decades. The largest ever study of government responses to violence against women and girls looked at 70 countries from 1975 to 2005, and they found that the most important factor influencing policy change was feminist activism. It played a more critical role than left-wing governments, the numbers of women in power and national wealth. Women, feminists, are those who make change for women facing men's violence. If we listened to feminists, we'd know that if we were to set out to end, rather than just respond to men's violence against women, then it's clear that our efforts must be multidimensional and address 5 different levels. Firstly, we'd have to look at the individual, the things that make each of us who we are and create the basis of how we react, behave, what we think and believe, including emotional and cognitive responses. Secondly, we'd have to look at situational or relational factors. This includes group and peer dynamics, how we as social beings are influenced by other people and how we influence them. It includes issues like socialisation, non-abusive relationships or indeed abusive relationships, and the way that we do or don't challenge people when they do something that we know is out of order. The next thing is the institutional level. This includes formal state responses and institutions like policing, the courts, the educational system, health and welfare responses, and the media, the things which process individuals, in other words, but also informal institutions such as organised crime and the sex trade, which includes prostitution and trafficking and pornography. The next level we need to look at is the structural level. Structural inequalities based on sex differences, on class, and on race, which reflect the interplay of factors at all different levels of socialisation and the way that inequality is embedded into the fabric of society. Sex differences and patriarchy, race and imperialism, socio-economic class and capital exploitation. And then the final level is the cultural level. This includes the norms and values and the ideas that we hold and understand as a society. So there are gendered concepts like sexual stereotypes, femininity and masculinity. And even if we personally reject those roles and stereotypes, we can still identify them. So what can you do? You can make politicians know that you care. You can make politicians know that men's violence against women is an issue that could lose them votes. Make sure that every woman counts. Make sure that they damn well better be able to say that only women have a cervix. Know their names, not just Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, but why not all the women who have been killed this year where a male suspect has been identified or charged? Currently, those women include Brenda Blaney, Judith Armstrong, Frida Walker, Marlene Doyle, Yasmin Chikafi, Lucy Powell, Marina Shaban, Lesma Jackson, Ashley Wadsworth, Charissa Brown, Katie Harris, Nicola Shabba, and Dawn Trussler. Thank you for listening to me.